Good morning. It's Peter Klein, Chief Investment Officer and co-founder of Align Wealth. And today we're going to talk a little bit about international giving. As many of you know, Align Wealth has been focused on the intersection of wealth management and philanthropy since its founding. And we believe at Align Wealth that it's critically important to serve our clients, be they a foundation, a family doing charitable giving, within their foundation or through a donor advised fund or other different methods and vehicles. We partner with our clients to help them further their legacy, getting the family involved, hosting retreats to discuss their values and their mission, and of course, to look at their portfolios, to coordinate those portfolios with those values, and to make sure that those companies and investments that we have in the portfolio are appropriate given the family's mission and values. On occasion, we have been asked about international giving. You know, the world's becoming a smaller place. So I'd like to welcome Ellena Fotinatos of King Baudin Foundation, United States. Welcome to the program today.
Thank you so much for having me.
Well, thank you. Thank you for participating in this Zoom. King Baudin Foundation, United States is in the area of international giving. Why don't you give us some background on the firm, please?
Sure, I would love to. So let me start with our roots and our unusual name. Our roots are in Belgium. The King Baudin Foundation in Belgium has been around for about 40 plus years, a very large foundation, almost 2 billion euro in assets, so quite a big player. The US Foundation was founded a little over 20 years ago, and the purpose of our founding was to promote giving from the US to Europe and Africa. So really to be that intermediary and to help promote giving in that direction. Since then, our family of foundations has grown quite a bit. We have a sister foundation in Canada, and we have a new partnership with an organization that is opening up possibilities for us in Asia and in Australia. So we're definitely growing, but the mission remains the same, which is promoting philanthropy internationally, and that includes working closely with donors and their advisors.
That's great. So that's really interesting because the essence of the foundation, which is a 501c3 organization, right? The essence of that organization, their mission, if you will, was to promote international giving. Mm-hmm. And rather than just sort of make donations to international, nonprofits, which I'm sure they do to some degree, what they really focused on is getting others to do it, make that sort of pie bigger and have more players in it. And I applaud that because sometimes you need to teach somebody how to fish rather than just feeding them the fish, right? So that's what they're sort of doing here.
Sure, absolutely. I mean, we work with individual donors, we work with family foundations, we work with corporate foundations, and in the instance of an individual donor, then obviously they need to give through a 501c3 in order to claim that tax deduction so they can give internationally. For other foundations, giving internationally might just be a once in a while type of thing. It might not be in their wheelhouse to take care of the due diligence themselves. So where we're coming in is we're simplifying the process for them, and we're taking care of all that diligence in-house for them so that they feel good about their donation. They know that there's accountability, that everything's transparent, and we make the process far easier for them.
Okay, so let me set it up via an example if I can. Let's say we have a family. Please. That's been giving to US-based 501c3 since its founding. They have a foundation for years. And around the kitchen table, the family gathers, and one of the family members, a board member, has relocated to Europe and has become interested in nonprofits in, say, Europe, UK, somewhere there. Mm-hmm. And for example, mm-hmm. And so first question, this particular family member, board member, comes to the foundation meeting around the kitchen table and says something to the effect, hey, I've identified some great nonprofits in Europe that I like the family foundation to support. Mm-hmm. And the patriarch says, oh, hold the phone, we got issues with that. They're not US based, 501c3s, we can't do it. And then somebody else chirps up, maybe we can, there's got to be a way. So the first
Hmm.
question is, given that setup, does the country itself matter? I mean, I don't suspect we'd be able to ever make, or who would ever want to make a contribution to North Korean nonprofit or an Iranian nonprofit. But I guess the first question is, does the country matter?
Sure. So our foundation traditionally has worked in Europe and Africa. I mentioned that we've expanded quite a bit. So that's expanded as well. We're making grants to Canada and through our partners, Gift to Asia, that includes Asia, meaning broad Asia, East Asia, South Asia, and Australia as well. So, and that's expanding further later this year. So, all that to say that traditionally our wheelhouse has been Europe and Africa, but we're able to service more donations, and that's going to increase. Certainly, North Korea and Iran, for example, are not countries that we would grant to.
Right.
We do also shy away from Russia, Ukraine, and Belarus. However, we've really given to every corner of Europe and
Okay,
Africa.
so what I'm gathering here is the country sort of does matter because in the end of the day, you, King Bodine, are the giver. It's the
Hmm.
family foundation, our example, gives to you. We'll unpack this in a second. Sort of makes a
Hmm.
donation to you, and then you make the donation to the end node. So for your perspective, you got to sort of feel comfortable with that end node. And if that end node is some
Certainly.
organization you never heard of before in some, questionable country, you may say no dice.
Certainly. And we don't want to be in a position where we're accepting a gift for a grant that we can't make. That's
Right. Right.
everyone
So you do
loses.
this on a,
So
right, right. So you do this, you set this all up on the back end, I mean, the pre-end before
correct.
having issues. All right, great. So back to the
Correct.
example. Now they agree it's a defined nonprofit. It's all good. And now what happens? Now the foundation or someone chirps up in the meeting and says, "Hey, King Bodine of United States Foundation, they could help us. They're experts in the area of international giving." They bring you into the conversation, and then what
Hmm.
happens? And how does it work in this example with a family foundation wanting to give to, say, a nonprofit, a bona fide nonprofit in the
Hmm.
UK or Italy or what have you?
Hmm. Sure. So first I would talk to the family. I want to listen. I want to know, is this really a one-off? Is this truly because of some unusual situation that this grant has come up, or is it possible that there's going to be continuous grants? The reason I try to find that out is because I want to know, are we packaging the gift as a one-time transaction, or are we really entering into a relationship to help handle gifts, no matter what the volume? It could be one gift a year, it could be one every couple of years. That's fine. Um, and that's really when we start talking more about the donor advised fund model, which we can talk about more. But generally, whether we're doing a single gift or multiple gifts, I want to understand, first of all, if they've had contact already with the organization. I'll ask them for the contact information if they have it. That facilitates things faster, but it's not a prerequisite. We find our way. But once I have the firm confirmation from the donor, we reach out to the organization, announce the grant. We are always in the background, meaning that the grantee knows that we're facilitating the grant, but that the gift is thanks to the generosity of the donor, of course, unless the donor prefers to be anonymous, which happens. And then the grantee is guided through the due diligence process, which is what the IRS requires. So that due diligence process is asking them, who are they? What do they do? Who's on their board? And what are we funding with this grant, basically? So very standard questions, grant making questions. We're collecting all this information. We have a grants manager who's working with them. Some organizations need more handholding than others. Fine, we can support quite a few languages, which helps in terms of timing because translations aren't necessary, et cetera. And once we have all this information, and once we have, of course, the gift from the donor, we can proceed with making the grant. So in terms of timeline, this typically takes about 2 to 3 weeks, depending on how responsive the grantee is. Sometimes things get drawn out a little bit. That's fine. And then really, in terms of the donor, we've seen it all. We've seen donors that want to be involved every step of the way. They want to be CC'd to every email, see how the sausage gets made, perfectly fine. And then we have others that just want to give us the direction, write the check, and just know that it's taken care of, also fine.
And then on their 990, the US based foundation, the
Mhm.
gift will be to you guys, right? Not to
Correct.
the end. Okay.
Yes.
And okay, I get that. And fully qualified distribution, not an issue. In other words, just like any other US based 501c3.
Correct. Yep. We have a EIN if they require, for example, our IRS determination letter. It's on our website, or I can send it. Sometimes organizations, if it's a family foundation giving to us or a private foundation, they might want us to complete some paperwork for them if they're a little bit more formal in their grant making. Perfectly fine. We can sign an agreement. We take care of all that.
So that's the one-off model. You'd mentioned earlier the DAF, the donor advised,
Hmm.
fund model, whereby if you, let's say we were going to support this nonprofit in Italy or wherever,
Hmm.
going forward, we're interested in being
Sure.
partnering with them. What would be the difference there? You would then put the capital into a donor advised fund?
Sure. So the grant making piece of it stays the same in terms of process, the recommendation, the due diligence, and the distribution. All that portion is the same. What changes is if a donor tells me, look, we're going to do this every year, then I would encourage them to open up a donor advised fund with us. Why? Well, because that way they get their own window into their activity through us, meaning that they're just getting more access to reporting. So they'll have a portal that they can log into. They can see the money's going out. They can see the money that they've contributed. They can also see their available balance at any time. Beyond that, what's nice is sometimes, first of all, with the DAF, we all know that it can be funded at any time, and
Paid
grants
out.
can be directed later. So that's a big plus when it's the end of the year and you realize that you haven't distributed enough. You have somewhere that you can park it and advise us down the road. So that's one thing. The
Yeah.
second thing is the reporting, which I mentioned. The third thing is sometimes, especially with families, if you have a DAF established that usually, let's say, is funded by the family foundation, but maybe there's some cause that you're interested in that has broader appeal, that maybe members of your community, your family want to also pitch in to make that grant, they can give
Ah,
to that DAF.
that's
So for
cool.
example, if there's a wedding and in lieu of a gift, somebody could contribute to the DAF, and then you direct that grant outwards to your favorite charity, for example. So there's some flexibility there that we wouldn't have for the one-off. The one-off is really gift comes in, grant
Right.
goes out.
Yeah, so I see this as being getting back to our table discussion with the Family Foundation.
Hmm.
Okay, they agree. We like this effort that was brought to our attention. Maybe there are other nonprofits in Europe or wherever that have a similar genre to them, and let's coordinate a certain amount of our portfolio for this. So now they say instead of that one grant to that one nonprofit, let's chunk off 100 grand, $1 million, whatever it might be, put it into the donor advised fund. That's our international pile of capital. That's we're going to
Hmm.
use this money to make international grants through the King Bodane Foundation,
Hmm.
and that is sort of their segmentation, if you will.
Hmm.
And I mean, they got to be careful because that one funding of that DAF that first time is that's their contribution. So you have to make sure that, I guess there are carry forwards you could utilize, but so they need to make sure they optimize that. So maybe they do it twice, to get the optimization out of it. But the bottom line is now that capital is segmented and is able to be given for international nonprofit work, which is great. And through your leadership and your help, they're
Hmm.
able to do that.
Correct.
Um, okay, let's talk about the contrast between what you guys do and what the American Friends of. You've heard of that, of course. We
Hmm.
all have. Not every nonprofit it has an American Friends of, and I
Hmm.
suspect there's an expense involved there, and we'll get to your expenses as well. But
Hmm.
can you just compare and contrast your operational way of doing it versus theirs?
Sure. So if you're a foreign charity and you want to raise money in the US, one way you can do it is by creating your own charity here, which is typically named Friends of. So, for example, the Louvre in Paris, they have the American Friends of the Louvre, which is a 501c3 here. So, if you want to support the Louvre, then you're going to be giving to the American Friends, and that makes a lot of sense. For other organizations, though, creating that 501c3 here doesn't make sense for them for a number of reasons. It doesn't make sense from a resource perspective. It doesn't make sense from a time perspective. They might also have the challenge with making sure that their donors are broad enough that it constitutes the public and they're not a private foundation, in fact, because they have one generous donor and not many donors from the public, so they can't pass the public support test. So there's a lot of obstacles which make it not so an attractive offer. So if you're an American donor and you want to give to an organization abroad that has its own American Friends Fund here with a 501c3, chances are that's your best bet, unless
Okay.
there's some, extenuating circumstances, let's say. But the reality is most organizations are not going to have that. We do work with organizations directly and offer them fiscal sponsorships. We have over 500 of those. From the donor's perspective, that just means that those are 500 organizations that we already know that we are raising money for collectively. Certainly, we grant to organizations we don't know that come to us through the donors and through their relationships. So from a donor's perspective, by being able to work through an intermediary like us, you're really opening up the door to a lot of possibilities. And by the way, even the largest institutions abroad do not necessarily have their own 501c3 here for the reasons that I stated. We work with huge organizations abroad that have found the cost benefit doesn't work out for them.
And from the donor's perspective, Ellena, what is the costs that are involved with your organization?
Sure. So the one-off cost, so let me distinguish them a little bit. So the one-off cost and the cost per grant is this per grant for a donor advised fund is actually the same. So I'll categorize that, but let me start by saying that by opening a donor advised fund with us, there's no additional fees. So there's really no added cost. There's no balance requirement. The balance can stay at zero because, for example, you're giving money and the money is going out. So your balance stays at zero. That's absolutely fine. No problem there. So starting 2022, our fees are going to be 5% for the first $100,000 of a grant. And that will then go to 3% for the amounts between 100,000 and 500,000. Then it drops to 1% for the next 400,000, and then 0.5% for anything in excess of $1 million. For the rest
So
of this,
I was going to say, so that bodes well for the family foundation that wants to sort of give internationally and give a chunk. They'll have less fees.
oh, absolutely. Well, so remember, we're charging on the outgoing grants.
Oh,
So
okay.
so if the family, which makes sense because if you think about it, if the family says, let's say we're going to fund the DAF for $1 million this year, we're going to receive the $1 million. It's fully grantable. We're holding the balance for you until we're advised otherwise. There's no fee being charged. If that $1 million is going to be split to 50 organizations receiving smaller grants, or one organization receiving a large grant, we're charging the fee on a per grant basis because we're doing all this different due diligence, right? So let's say that we have a grant going out of $150,000. We're charging 5% for the first 100 of that, and then 3% for the 50 of that.
Got it. And that's the work that you're doing on the front end. And there's something
All
called,
in.
yeah. Oh, really?
All in.
And the work that you do is not only on the front end, the due diligence and all the work that you described, but there's something called expenditure responsibility. Would you unpack that for us, please?
Sure. So the due diligence process that I summarized is under the heading of expenditure responsibility. So basically, the IRS says, listen, if you're going to make international grants, you can do so one of two ways. You can do so by through expenditure responsibility or through equivalency determination. They're equal. In our experience, one is easier for the grantee than the other, especially when we're talking about smaller organizations, which is expenditure responsibility. So that's what we adhere to. We do have elements of the other one built into our process, but really all that's describing is the due diligence process and the information that we're collecting. Because remember, as you said previously, we are technically re-granting the funds. So we are responsible for that grant. It's reported on our 990. Any challenges, any accountability issues are ours. So we are responsible for that.
So that responsibility is essentially saying, hey, I got to make sure this is a bona fide
Of course.
501c3, and you do your work on that, and just make sure that it passes muster, and that's great. And so that's a way for a family foundation that wants to give internationally. Here's a way for them to do so. And you know what? This is becoming a bigger thing now. We're seeing,
Yeah.
especially post-pandemic, we're seeing a lot of nations that may have been as fortunate as the United States in their public health and medical care and healthcare. And many folks are saying, you know what, we're a globe. If anything, if this has shown us anything, we're connected. And so maybe providing smart, targeted grants to international organizations can clearly change the way the world operates. So I applaud it, and I think it's great. And I want to thank you for being our guest today and explaining this issue of international giving. My thanks to Ellena Fotinatos and the King Bodine Foundation of the United States for being here today discussing international grant making. Thanks so much, Ellena.
Thank you so much, Peter. Truly a pleasure.
I'll
Thanks.
talk to you soon.